time for our next keynote. It is 5G private networks, challenges and opportunities. My guest is Paul Graham, 5G and Cloud Native Consulting Technical Manager at Oracle Consulting. Hi, Paul. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you. Doing well, thank you.
Excellent. Well, you have the pleasure of continuing with our second keynote of the day. So the virtual floor is yours, sir.
Good morning. I'm Paul Graham, Consulting Technical Manager with Oracle, and I'm going to talk to you about 5G private networks, challenges, and opportunities. So the first thing I'll say is there is no innovation without connectivity. The thing about 5G has been we talk about all these services we can bring in. We talk about things like high device density, IoT, self-driving cars, tractors that drive themselves and all these things. But without connectivity, we cannot bring them in, okay? And we're discovering that at the moment. And so today, in this keynote, I will talk about private networks and hybrid networks as a method of basically bringing connectivity up to the levels we need it to introduce these services. So when we talk about 5G networks and hybrid networks, what do we mean? Well, we have pure data 5G networks, and that's what like Tobias was talking about earlier in his keynote, actually, CBR Spectrum in the US from AWS, 5G standalone. We have public and private roaming data, so potentially you can be on a public network and then roam onto somebody else's 5G data network. We have neutral host networks, and neutral host is where you provide everything for all operators. The typical use case there is a stadium. You have lots of people on different operators, and you want to tune it so everybody gets good connectivity. Lots involved there, but we'll talk a bit about that a bit later on. And again, as Tobias talked earlier, LEO and SATCOM, and a lot is talked about this at the moment. It's in the news. Starlink, OneWeb, and AWS launching low Earth orbit constellations to provide connectivity. And I believe this is coming to us quicker than we think. My iPhone, I saw it connect a satellite the other day for emergency messaging, so it's kind of there, it's going to be happening. And these are the things that are going to help us improve connectivity. I'm here in Ipswich and Suffolk, and we are kind of like the poster child for private networks because we have it going on now. Right? Down the road here, you have Felixstowe Docks. They have their own private LTE and putting in 5G networks. They're doing it. It's the classic example. It's a 24/7 operation and needs good connectivity. It's going to automate all those things going on down there, you know, cranes, lorries, that sort of thing. We also have a lot of agri-tech. It's amazing how areas full of agri-tech now. It's happening more than we know about. So if you want those automated combines and drilling and ploughing, they're going to need good networks. And the issue there is lots of what space is, how do you provide connectivity where you're not got the necessary mobile networks to put in place. So these are the kind of use cases we're talking about, right? And we're going to talk about how we're going to address that. Okay, so what are the challenges? Well, one of the challenges is interconnect. It's all very well, you can go out, buy your own private network, but then you're going to have to connect it, okay? If you're pure data like the AWS offering, you can just connect to the internet. But if you want to be involved in the bigger mobile ecosystem, like you do when you're roaming, when you go abroad and you roam onto somebody else's network, this has to be taken care of. That's interconnect. If you're going to interconnect with other networks, then you're going to have to introduce things like settlement and payments. If you have a subscriber who goes onto somebody else's network, you need to manage that settlement and payments and agree on how you're going to charge for those services between you. We can say we're just going to go 5G, but of course, devices and things mean that you might have to support previous generations. It's going to be 4G LTE voice, maybe as an example. And then you're going to have to orchestrate between all this. So if you don't just want to go standalone and you want to interwork with other networks to provide services to other operators, which will be good business. If you go the expense of building your own private network, you want to offer it to other operators and other subscribers, then you're going to have to introduce orchestration. Then the big 5G word has always been slicing. How are we going to make that happen? So very well, you can have a slice where there's good connectivity, but there might be a concept called hybrid slicing where you have a private network and you introduce a kind of slicing across into your private network. And there's device support. Everybody may not have the most up-to-date, latest, greatest phone or even IoT devices, right? A lot of those IoT devices out there are still on things like 2G, which is going to be an issue when the big switch off happens, 2G and 3G. So how do you support all this kind of legacy infrastructure as well? Again, do we have to support full services, voice and messaging, as well as data? We associate data with 5G, but there's other services out there which require their own kind of technology stacks and services. And of course, sustainability, as Tobias talked before in the previous keynote. It's no longer a kind of a niche thing or nice to have. It's about business viability. When telcos suddenly have an increase in their electricity bill or energy bills up to 500 million, suddenly sustainability becomes center of everything. And it's important to take that into consideration when building these 5G and hybrid networks. It's all very well standing up a load of equipment, but then suddenly discovering it's not viable because it's going to cost too much to run. And sustainability is now the key point there. Of course, the answer to that is shared infrastructure, and that means cloud. Back in the old days, if you wanted to build your own mobile network, you bought the equipment, you put it in your machine rooms, you stood out your radio network, put all the backhaul in place yourself. Now it's all about sharing infrastructure, putting those services that you would have had in your own machine rooms into the cloud, and also O-RAN, and just making the entire thing more viable. If you don't do that, if it's not sustainable, it's impossible. It becomes too expensive. And where an operator with tens of millions of subscribers can afford to do things like that, if you have a business that needs the connectivity, but your revenues are relatively lower compared with a major operator, you're going to have to find ways of building your network on a much lower budget. And that's all about using cloud infrastructure and maybe shared radio and things like that. And it's all on point at the moment, right? This is what everybody's talking about. How do we build this out and make it sustainable? I guess it's going to be a major theme across this event, right? I think 2 or 3 years ago, an event like this talking about networks, you would not have mentioned sustainability. Now it's front and center. Otherwise, it's not going to be viable. So how do we go about enabling all this? Well, in my time, I was working on some of these, you probably come across them, kind of novel roaming solutions, where if you went abroad and you wanted to make it, you don't want to pay the data roaming costs, the voice calls, you had these kind of multi-SIM type solutions. Well, now this has been discussed as the solution to support private networks. IMSIs are basically what you have on your SIM card in your phone. It's your identity. And what it means is you can have identities on different networks. And of course, in modern phones now, like the iPhone and Android phones, you can have multiple SIMs. In your iPhone, you'd have still have the physical SIM, but you have the ability to put in an eSIM on other networks. And in iOS 14, we saw the ability to do geofencing with SIMs. So once it detects you in a certain area on a potential private network, it swaps your SIM in and connects to that network. And this is increasingly looking like the viable way of doing this. The alternative is something called IPX, which is the reason your roaming data is expensive, right? When you roam abroad, you connect into a local network, you then have to go through a hub to connect back to your home network. So back in the UK, if you're in the UK or wherever you're based. So these are the solutions that were needed to enable kind of private networks. You can roam onto them, roam off of them. And then, of course, you need orchestration between these public and private networks. You need to manage how the subscribers and the phones go on to them. You may be in an area where you want to jump onto someone else's network, and your phone will have to manage it. So the alternative to this is how we do it at the moment, which is I go abroad, in the UK, I go to France, I connect to their local network, but then I have to pay for that in roaming costs. Again, that becomes unviable. Also, there's no regulation around making public networks allowing people to connect to them. It's kind of on a choice-by-choice basis, and that may be a blocker as well to introducing private and hybrid networks. Whereas if you have your own range of SIM and you can manage it, then it's up to you. Okay, so these are one of the challenges. How do you manage going between these different networks? And we're already seeing solutions, right? Apple's taking the lead here with its multi-SIM geofencing that's put into iOS. Okay, so what is this all about? This is about orchestration, and yeah, I spent time with these MVNO, roaming MVNOs, where you have a SIM card that's got multiple SIMs on it effectively. When you go abroad, you're on a local SIM, you haven't got the roaming costs. We can use these solutions to manage our 5G private networks. So in the top bit there, I've shown you the day where you've gone to your visiting network, and then you have settlement, and you had to pay to use that. And you have a settlement solution. And you have to pay a lot to use that settlement solution, okay, in the connectivity. On the bottom here, okay, we still need a piece of orchestration, whether it's in your phone or services in the network. It will manage how you roam on and off between your public and your private network. And you still need a settlement solution, you still need payments, and you still need billing. Because fundamentally, it's a B2B offering. It's it's a private network offering us roaming to an operator of a public network, and you need to manage that as settlement. So the classic use case for this is the stadium. So here I am at Ipswich Town Football Club, end of last season, amazing game, but got promoted. But what you see is a full stadium. And with a full stadium comes no connectivity, right? With no connectivity, as I mentioned before, comes no innovation. They've had major success, but the problem is the infrastructure is creaking, right? How can a football club make more money? It can sell more things at halftime. Fortunately, all the stands everything's full up, everybody's queuing. How could you fix that? Well, you could fix it with apps, right? You can order on your app, have it there ready. But if you don't have any connectivity, you cannot offer that service. And one of the things that comes up in the fan forum quite obviously is, a young lad or young boy, says, "Please, Mr. CEO of a football club, can I have Wi-Fi?" And he looks down, and he knows it's a problem, but it's a cost. It's a significant cost to provide connectivity. There's a Wi-Fi solution, or there's a 5G or neural net, your neutral host solution. But there's a cost. Fundamentally, they have home matches 20 days of the year, and that's needed for 2 hours. Does it justify the cost for 80 days, 80 hours? So these are the sort of things we have to consider, right? We think the technology is there. We think we can offer 5G into this space, but in realism, we have to come up with other solutions. How can we provide connectivity into this space? And it's a big opportunity. And then what's going to happen is the cost of the networks will come down. They have to, with initiatives like ORAN, and as there's more places and more stadiums, and more public areas, like the middle of the towns, then there'll be more demand and the cost comes down. That's how these things work, right? And imagine the footfall being lost to the town centre when people come out of here, their phones are drained, don't work, and they all go home. So it's a significant economic thing for not just the stadium or the operators, it's for the local economy, it's significant. Right, so another concept, private networks and slicing. We've heard of slicing. How do we make slicing work? Again, we've got to add in more connectivity when we need it. An organization can buy a slice and own something all the way through network, but if they have a piece that's not being covered, then we have to extend that out. And it may be you build your own private network that extends the coverage and the slicing. So we avoid expensive interconnect, IR21, which is the agreements between all the operators and how they work together. And you don't have to have roaming agreements. Right, so these are the things that need to be considered when we go about it. A good use case also, the coronation. In the UK, we had the coronation early in the year. Luckily, last time I gave this talk, I had the people who built these networks in the room, so we discussed it, and what I can say is, so here, this is the coverage map. We have the palace at one end. During the coronation, they went down through the aisle there, by the parks. And what actually happened here? There's a combination of just about everything you can imagine. You had the consumer networks, you had the people watching on their phones. They wanted to cover it, they filmed it, so you need to enhance that. You had broadcast networks, and there was 2 broadcast networks offered. So BBC had a neutral host network purpose-built for the event, and ITN had a slice on the Vodafone network, but they also had a private network as well. So there's a combination of all the things we've talked about, and it shows the amount of effort needed. But it did guarantee good connectivity on the day. It made it a success, and these are the sort of things that need to be considered. So this is good because it did showcase the technology at work, and it worked. Okay, we had private networks, we had slicing, and the consumer networks all at the same time. It does require effort. So the final thing is monetization. Innovators tend to ignore monetization, but it's a very important aspect. All of this requires a settlement solution to monetize it. So that's going to be billing. It's business to business, so it's settlement and all the terms and everything that comes with it. And I've been told there's no current 5G settlement solution. So there's a big opportunity out there. We have billing systems, and we can build that, put that in place to enable movement between the private and the public networks. Okay, the final point, Tobias mentioned before, is LEO, low Earth orbit satellites, and SATCOM. It's in the news, we're hearing about it all the time. Got OneWeb, Starlink, AWS, and this is going to significantly improve connectivity as well. People are skeptics, but however, eventually technology catches up. So it does require what they call frequent landing or grounding, or that's Earth stations connecting to the satellites, connecting to the networks. That will happen, but it's going to offer either direct, so your phone to the satellite, or as backhaul. Backhaul is where you connect to the local cell site, and the cell site will connect to satellites to provide the connectivity into remote places. So when Agritech needs a network out in the field somewhere, potentially satellites can provide that connectivity. And finally, yes, it's all about orchestration. All these things have to work together somehow. So there's going to be a big demand for those services in between providing the orchestration. And that's going to be in the cloud and shared. So the economics all come down because we can address connectivity. Novel and cheaper O-RAN radio solutions will come out, and the infrastructure will all be shared, bringing costs down. So conclusions, yes, connectivity needs to improve to provide those innovative services. However, There are solutions in the form of private networks, extending public networks, and finally, there's still a lot of work and a lot of opportunity out there. Right? It's not done, but in combination of cloud services, O-RAN, new tech like satellites, low Earth orbit satellites, together will provide the connectivity so we and everybody else can get those services they need. Okay, and that brings me to the end. So I guess, and any questions at this point?
Paul, thank you very, very much indeed. The map of the coronation especially, that was fascinating, just seeing how all that worked. But a couple of questions, if I may, before we let you go. Yep. Do you feel we're not far off the point where private networks are almost going to be seen as an essential service? Like you wouldn't have an office building without running water, for example. Do you think we're not far off that?
Absolutely. I think we're almost there. And if we're not there already, right, we're seeing thousands of these networks being put out there because they're a necessity. We need the connectivity. Yeah, if you haven't got the connectivity in your building and your office, as we see around London, right, I've done a lot of work around this. Coverage is quite poor in places you'd expect it, so you must put these networks in place. And there will be private networks.
When there's so many different technical options, as you've run through there, how important is that simplicity is maintained when there are so many different options, so many different variables, to make sure that it remains effective?
Yeah, we're going to see mass consolidation on that, right? There's all sorts of solutions coming out, but there's going to have to be one kind of simple solution to this, and we're going in that kind of multi kind of SIMs direction. It will be managed by your phone. You'll choose to connect to a network, and Apple or whoever may grab that one, right? Because it's going to be in the phone and the way to manage it. At the moment, yeah, orchestration is complex. How do you move between these networks? How do you put settlement in? Roaming solutions, as they stand at the moment, are complex. Maybe a bit of a barrier. So something more is going to have to come in there. And it's looking like it'll be taken care of on the devices.
And finally, you were touching on the LEO SATCOM technology there as well. Is that the game changer? Is that going to really move things on?
I believe so, yeah, definitely. Why are some of the brightest minds focusing on this? Right? Why are they? Why is Jeff Bezos and AWS and Elon Musk and those people, why are they focusing on that? Because they know that's where things are going. Right? They know it's all about connectivity, and the lower orbit stuff, it's there. It seems to be viable. So if you've got iOS 14 with the latest phone, your phone will connect to a satellite. You can't get it on a regular basis, but it will send emergency messages. So it seems we're almost there.
Okay, Paul. Fascinating stuff, and it does affect everyone. As you say, at the coronation or at a football match, everyone gets their phones out, and if they haven't got connectivity, what are they going to do? They just have to watch it live, the old-fashioned way. God forbid.
And the economy will lose out. Right? You can't sell stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. Linking it to the finances there. Paul, thank you so much. Really enjoyed your company this morning. Thanks for joining us at Cloud and 5G Live.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.